You're listening to Startup Recruitment Failures. Behind every successful founder lies a tale of recruitment ups and downs. Join me on this thrilling journey and learn firsthand from top leaders on how to navigate through challenges and stay ahead of the game. We all make mistakes, but the real growth happens when we learn from them early on. Hello, Daryn. Thank you so much for participating here today at Startup Recruitment Failures podcast.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? Um,
I'm good.
Maybe firstly, you could introduce yourself to the listeners because you have really impressive experience working in impressive companies.
Thanks. I've been involved with a number of different types of companies in professional services and technology. My career started as a software implementer in the days of large SAP implementation projects. And it grew
Mhm.
from there, where I started working with systems integrators that would implement large platforms, large business software platforms, along with infrastructure and additional software and components for quite large companies, enterprise level companies.
Mhm.
And as my career grew, I started taking on roles as a board member of medium sized companies, scaling and growth oriented companies. And now that's what I do full time is I spend all my time with companies who have achieved their first level of growth and they're now trying to scale from that initial point either globally or to broader products or platforms and
Mhm.
get returns for their investors.
Okay, that sounds super interesting. And today you agreed to share a few examples about like proving how important is to correctly shape a role before starting hiring and like all the recruitment tasks. So yeah, maybe we could start from the first one where you had the situation when a startup or was it a scale up already hired a first time team lead.
Yeah, when we first started talking about, what are some of the experiences I've had where my recruitment experience or journey didn't go quite to plan, the examples that I've been closest to are examples in ScaleUps. So the company wasn't quite a startup. They had some initial signals of growth, some initial signals of
Hmm.
traction, but they also weren't repeatable quite yet. So they sort of sat in that middle zone.
Hmm.
So when
That's the
we
most difficult one.
yeah, because you need characteristics in the role from both
Yeah.
sides of it. You need people who have a growth mindset, they have experience in a growing company where
Hmm.
everything isn't figured out, but
Hmm.
they also need to know a little bit about where you're going next. So they
Hmm.
need some of those business models or experiences or history in the maturity levels of something that's a little bit more than what a
Hmm.
startup had.
And
But a
it's
lot of the
kind of a
people,
transition period, right? So, and the
it
role
is
itself, it's changing, right? According to the changing circumstances.
the clue is in the word scale up. You're
Mm.
on a journey to change. Your purpose is to not remain a startup. Your purpose is to get
Yeah.
the business into something more mature, more repeatable. So those types of companies attract a lot of profiles that sit on either side of that.
Hmm.
And so a number of the folks that are often attracted to scale ups are people who are looking to maybe get like a first time team lead role. They might have been a really successful individual contributor, but now they want to do a little bit more. And going to a scale up, which is a little more complex, a little more
Hmm.
advanced than their history, is a pretty good scenario for them to get that kind of opportunity. The
Hmm.
challenge becomes is taking a look at where their skills, their personality, and their experiences really fit with what has to happen now, but also where you're going. And if this is the first time they've moved to the next level, is this the right place for them to do it, given what the business needs to achieve? And I had a role that we were filling on the people team in a past experience where it was a team lead role. There was going to be a couple a handful of individual contributors reporting to somebody who was going to be the team lead. The role wasn't shaped at a senior level, but it was at a functional lead level. So you did have to have some good solid domain experience and knowledge in the function. You did have to have some cross functional knowledge in terms of what are the other functions in the business doing. And you did need to have some stakeholder management experience because we did have a senior leadership team, we did have a board, we did have more senior colleagues, people at director level, VP level. So you did have to have some background,
Hmm.
but didn't
How
really
big
have
was
to
the
be.
company and how big was the team?
The company had it was under 100 employees, but that would have been the business plan range would have been moving from
Hmm.
sort of that 75 employee level past 100. So it would have been in
Okay.
that range that the role would have had to cover
Hmm.
in, say, a 2 to 3 year time frame. And so the challenge was that one of the candidates had very strong domain experience and uh, broad functional experience where they had done in the past each of the functions that we needed, but
Hmm.
they hadn't sat in the chair in the past.
Hmm.
So we were going to be hiring them into the chair for the first
Hmm.
time.
You
And
mean without leading experience?
yes, they hadn't led all of the
Hmm.
functions before, but they had done all of the functions before. So
Hmm.
that would have been favoring the domain knowledge
Yeah.
as opposed to favoring the leadership experience.
Hmm. And how big was
So
the team?
the team would have had two direct reports and then some service providers for some of the functions. So,
Hmm.
relatively complex already, an employment environment where there were several countries already that they would have had to cover. So, it wasn't super complex. We
Hmm.
didn't have 500 employees, we didn't have, a six-level structure, but there was some complexities
Hmm.
around
Hmm.
where people worked, the governance of those countries and so forth. We had a flexible employment model, so some of the issues that happen,
Hmm.
pre-COVID and post-COVID were some of the
Yeah.
questions we were facing. Um, so we erred on the side of somebody who had experience in the domains, thinking that they could expand because
Hmm.
um, their
Which
intentions
makes sense,
were
actually.
so strong.
So what happened? Why it went wrong?
It went wrong when, well, I'll phrase it this way. It started to wobble when
Hmm.
the issues that we really needed someone to start tackling sooner
Hmm.
rather than later were sort of happening within the first 3 months of them joining. So they
Hmm.
didn't really have a settling in period to get to know the functions within their remit. They had to really hit the ground running and start analyzing our issues and working out how to handle some of our key questions right away.
Hmm.
So you can imagine if you're somebody who had done the functions but hadn't led the functions, that analytical process of making a decision about what to do about it versus someone has already made the decision and you're sitting down and working on it, that was a challenge.
Can you give an example of like these challenging situations or like problems the person was not
So
capable to handle?
the global payroll environment, there's using an employer of record is a key decision that a lot of scale ups who have employees in more than one
Hmm.
country decide how they're going to handle that. Like, are they going to manage their own payroll themselves and create the legal entities in several countries, or are they not going to do that? Are they going to use an employer of record to basically provide that infrastructure to them and
Hmm.
run the payroll situation for them? So there's pros and cons and various costs to both those situations. And then there's sort of the choice you might make under different growth models. So depending on how you think you're going to grow, your decision might be different in terms of how you go with each of those
Hmm.
decisions. So landing on the ground and having to very quickly jump into quite a large topic proved quite a big jump to make so early on in the role. I think
Mm-hmm.
if the individual had had more time to settle into what their own leadership style was going to look like and their
Mm-hmm.
own decision making framework was going to look like,
Yeah.
it could have gone a little bit better. If
Basically, to have a vision, right? How they think things should
Yeah,
be working in most efficient way.
exactly. Have more time with the functions to sort of understand what they looked like today
Mm-hmm.
before they had to come up with, okay, here's what I think the strategy needs to look like.
Mm-hmm.
It probably could have gone better, but our needs were we needed them to hit the ground running much earlier
Mm-hmm.
with that particular topic. And it caused a lot of stress for the person, and it caused more cycles on the topic and the decision than um, was comfortable for the
Mm-hmm.
other leaders in the business. And it, it meant that we were sort of cycling over the decision quite a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, the decision we made was probably the right decision, but with the not right service provider. So it
Mm.
was sort of half okay. And, was it the end of the world? No. Did we experience any side effects or long term consequences? Not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't completely terrible, but it wasn't an overly pleasant experience going through that journey, and
Yeah.
it was probably quite stressful for both sides of the equation because the person was getting to know everybody. We didn't all know each other yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, if I was to reflect back on the what would I've done differently, I would have balanced what are the key choices, key strategies, key decisions that the person has to do in
Mm-hmm.
their first 30, 60, 90 days, and what's the magnitude of that
Mm-hmm.
compared with what are the experiences the person has to have on the way in.
Jobrely now offers full cycle recruitment services, from creating a job ad to presenting shortlisted candidates after initial interviews. Fill out the project brief, and candidate profiles will be sourced for you. Connect your LinkedIn account, and a personalized messaging sequence will be sent from your LinkedIn account to all of the potential candidates. And after initial interviews, a comprehensive scorecard of shortlisted candidates will be presented. Visit jobrely.com and start a free trial. But isn't it that people don't want repeat working on the same after same problems, right? So it's very normal that you expect to grow into your role by changing a company.
You do. You typically believe that if somebody is selecting to apply for a job at a scale up company, that they're choosing to do that, and so they're ready to be doing something new. They have the
Mm-hmm.
enthusiasm for that journey, and they will jump in with both feet. They know they're going to face some stress, so when they
Mm-hmm.
face some stress, you sort of expect that they're ready for that. Um,
So was the problem that the person experienced too much stress and they were not happy themselves, or it was more
yeah,
like a company's decision? Okay,
no, they experienced the
I
stress of
see.
that process because it was quite
Mm,
early in the curve
mm,
and in their onboarding, and then correspondingly their colleagues that were also team leads and leaders within the business that they weren't making the decision, but they were participants in the decision.
mm-hmm,
They also experienced the additional time in the decision making process, and
mm-hmm,
that's a lot when you're early on in your journey with a company and you're trying to get to know those people, and they're
mm-hmm,
experiencing the stress of the fact that you're not processing the choices
mm-hmm,
that we're kind of trying to decide between with the company.
mm-hmm,
So it was, if they had more experience being a team lead and with that process of proposing a decision and working through it, it might have been a little less stressful for all concerned.
mm-hmm,
I think what it felt like for a lot of people was this churning through alternatives that didn't make sense, hadn't been
mm-hmm.
vetted, hadn't been researched sufficiently.
How
before
long
they were kind of brought to
did
the
it
table.
take until the person noticed that it's not going to work long term?
Um, better part of a year. Better
Okay,
part
that's
of
a
a year.
lot. Okay.
Yeah, because they had experience in the doing. They
Mm-hmm.
had it, and so when it came to just this is how it's set up, just keep doing that. They were actually fine with that part of it. It was when decisions for new things came up and they had to act like a leader. They had to bring the team
Mm-hmm.
to the table and facilitate making a decision, making a change,
Mm-hmm.
proposing something new. That was
Mm-hmm.
all first time experiences for this person.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that anything like could have helped? For example, some additional coaching or some I don't know, learning or like conferences or finding a mentor. I don't know, like something
Yeah,
to help that person to be more supported in their function.
early on, I think shaping the role around emphasis and focus would have helped the
Hmm.
candidate, but also the other leaders working with the candidate in terms of, saying, look, there's these really important topics, and then there's the business as usual stuff. We're going to need your time to be split with, like,
Hmm.
say, 60% of your time on the new stuff,
Hmm.
and there's already people in the team for the old stuff that,
Hmm.
can kind of carry on the way it has. And then also shared that with other people so that the people that the candidate would be working with would also understand, oh, okay, the majority of their time is going to be spent on these emerging
Yeah.
topics. It's going to take a little more time,
Hmm.
and have everybody's expectations managed around where the emphasis would be, what they're bringing to the table.
Hmm.
Not everyone participates in the recruitment process, do they? So some people
Hmm.
know the new person well, and because they might have interviewed them during the process or met, but then others don't. So kind of more
Yeah.
that upfront sharing and surfacing, what are the priorities of the role? So
Yeah.
how is the person going to be coming
Hmm.
in? And maybe if the
I think
candidate
it's a very
knew that,
I think
they
it's
might
a
have chosen
very
something different also.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's a very common problem, right? And especially when you just start scaling, because
Yeah.
there's no time for things like, I think it's the best when the whole team can meet the candidate and they all can agree and at least know the experience and everything. And onboarding process. It also like everyone is like in such a rush and it's no time, to really sit and talk and discuss
Yeah.
all the details. So because we in our heads we think that everyone knows what it's needed, right? And like
Yeah.
you're working in the same company, so how come you cannot see it, right? Um, but yeah, so like as always, we need to really take our time because this is the most important time, the thing.
One of the other things that was sort of going on in the background is um, the hiring manager for that role probably started hiring quite late, probably later
Mm-hmm.
than they should have, like starting the recruiting process. So by the time
Mm.
the person sort of joined the business, the need for some specific decisions to be made was very, very high. And so there was
Mm.
this pent up energy around, okay, now we've got this person. We'll be able to move forward on that topic
Yes.
that we've been waiting for so long. And
Mm.
that pent up energy isn't really, it's not the new person's fault. It's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
fault
yeah.
of the people that have been
Yeah,
in the business for a while that
exactly. If there
didn't
is
get it
already a
going soon enough.
problem, if,
Yeah.
if there is already a problem in a company, you cannot expect that the new person will come and solve everything, right?
No.
So, yeah, yeah.
So there's
And
the pent up energy with somebody who
mm,
this is a real opportunity for them. They're excited. This is the first time they've been a team lead, and they
mm-hmm,
arrive, and there's a bit of pent up energy. They didn't necessarily understand the emphasis of, like,
mm-hmm,
how much of your time should be spent on making this new stuff work versus just
mm-hmm,
just keep the old stuff going. It's fine.
Yeah.
So it really put a lot of stress on things. And so
Mhm.
I think that upfront shaping of the person, the role, but also the situation
Mhm.
around the role and the person is really important for
Mhm.
the person, but also the colleagues of the
Yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Everyone has to be aligned. And you also mentioned a similar case, maybe not so similar, is hiring a person from only having experience working in a startup for a scale up company.
Yeah, it can happen on both sides where, scaling sits in the middle, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hire somebody who perhaps is early career or mid career, but really all of their experience is coming from quite small companies, they might only possess knowledge of
Mm-hmm.
those quite small examples of how a function or a process might work. Then on the flip side, there's the other direction where you're a scale up and you want some of those heavy hitting skills. You want some real maturity out of maybe a more senior role, and you might be looking at candidates and finding the ones that have worked for very large companies attractive. But on the flip side, they sometimes, not always, but a lot of times have only worked in a context where a lot of things have already been figured out for them. And so then they come to work for a scale up, and the job is to figure out how.
So
Yeah.
maybe to continue with, you could share an example when a person only with a startup experience joined a scale up, and what was that position?
So in a prior role, one of the companies that I had been advising on their go to market strategy and some of their key roles in sales and business development, they were taking a look at what they needed to move beyond sort of founder led sales and the original model where they got their early product market fit and started scaling into more repeatable sales and expanding their footprints with customers. And the candidate that we ended up hiring was a very charismatic, large personality, a lot of domain experience, but most of their experience, even though they carried a title in past roles that suggested they'd been a little more senior, like a manager or director level,
Mm-hmm.
the scenario that they were in was startups, quite small startups,
Mm-hmm.
startups of like under 10 employees. So really, most of their experience had been going from zero to not a very sophisticated sales approach and strategy and go to market. And so when we started to need more mature approaches for the kinds of clients that we needed, um, the person who took on the role just simply didn't have them in
Mm-hmm.
their experience, and would actually feel somewhat intimidated by other folks on the team that had seen other types of business models or approaches or processes, and it started to create some friction
Mm-hmm.
between various team members. And so I was an advisor to this business, and they were sort of describing what the scenario was. I met with the various players in the team, and we came up with a bit of a strategy around reshaping some of the roles to play to the individual's strengths.
Mm-hmm.
When you take a look at like how did this happen? How did this get here? How did that get there? The thing that appeared to happen is the product for the team was a very high knowledge value product. And so, because the candidate had such strong industry background, they really valued that separately
Mm-hmm.
from the other skills that were needed.
Mm-hmm.
So, great skills in that area, but missing skills in the other areas, which were actually the areas needed to start to scale.
What
And
were the
so,
missing skills?
the missing skills were team development, like how do you develop a sales team? How do you
Mm-hmm.
add others to your team that
What
have
was
the
the
right
role
mix?
of the person?
It was a sales manager role.
Okay. Okay.
So, and it was in the time when we were moving from having individual salespeople to having a
Mm-hmm.
sales team,
Mm-hmm.
moving from having, more like founder led sales to
Mm-hmm.
having a base of customers that could then be grown like accounts, and
Mm-hmm.
from capturing more market share from the ideal customer profile in our target segments. So those concepts where you are trying to move to a more mature place, possibly because you're getting another round of funding where you need some more maturity in that business model, and you need to be able to showcase that you're capturing more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the company had valued the domain experience of the individual more than their ability to grow a team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And probably because the people interviewing for the role were the founders of the business. So, in a way, they were hiring in their own image
Mm-hmm.
versus getting input from other people that had hired for roles at different, more mature stages of the growth of the business.
Mm-hmm. It's more like a bias hiring, right?
Yeah, which
Which is
everybody has
also
different
important.
biases.
If you're a
Yeah,
founder and you trust sales, like
yeah,
business development, into other person's hands, the
yeah,
chemistry has to be there, right? And sometimes we
absolutely.
overestimate, overvalue actually
Yeah.
the chemistry.
Yeah, and it sort of begs the question when you're a scale up and you're starting to fill in some of your roles with a little more maturity, experiences from a broader range of companies, who is doing the hiring, who is involved in the hiring process, who is involved with shaping the brief for the role, and what's getting included in there, because you might be hiring for a person that isn't currently
Mm-hmm.
employed in the business. And so it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to describe somebody you don't work with yet.
Exactly. So it's in both ways, right?
Yeah,
It's on one hand, like I always suggest founders to interview at least 10 potential candidates, 20 the best, and then to select. Because if you're, especially if you're not a specialist, like if you're like a technical founder or you don't have experience in marketing and you're hiring CMO, so better ask candidates, and
yeah.
then you will understand what your business needs, right? On the other hand, you need to have like business goals at least, right? In order to check whether these people know how to achieve these goals.
I had one recruiter that I worked with in the past that did a good job of showcasing a slate of candidates, a range, so
Mm-hmm.
that you when you were in the interview process, you could actually see different levels of maturity in an individual candidate, and that was
Mm-hmm.
helpful
Mm-hmm.
for the hiring manager to see what they didn't currently work with, see a
Exactly.
live example of
Yeah.
somebody that maybe was overshot the requirements, but also was maybe on the lower end, and
Mm-hmm.
make an informed choice of where in that curve do we need
Mm-hmm.
to hire for the business
Yeah.
plan, how far we expect that person to go.
Yeah. Because we always talk about the ideal candidate's profile,
Yeah,
right? But on the other end, it's like, is it really possible to draw
yeah,
the ideal candidate's profile? I doubt. So it's really good to
yeah.
compare and then to make the final decision.
I really find that when candidates are really good at not treating the interview like an interview, but treating the
Mm-hmm.
interview like a conversation, you
Mm-hmm.
actually learn quite a lot as
Mm-hmm.
the hiring manager in the conversation as
Yeah.
well. And it can really change your mind about where you want to
Mm-hmm.
hire from.
Yeah, yeah. And it also helps a lot to give a task assignment on a very high level, but
Yeah,
basically reflecting your company's needs and just to see the thinking process, right? Just,
yeah,
asking a person, a candidate to walk through that thinking process. And in this way, it's pretty easy to assess the level of maturity
yeah,
for the role, basically, and it doesn't have to be like really specific or like solving a specific problem, but just to see like what are the habits, and are they already formed, or the person
yeah.
will just come and learn at your company, right? And maybe for corporate it's great, but for a scale up it could cost too much.
Yeah, it's like a live example where you get to see how they shape their thoughts. How do they
Mm-hmm.
shape the questions and answers that they might consider for
Yeah.
the exam question?
Yeah.
Um, having that sort of at the in the later stages of the interview process, especially for team lead roles or senior contributor or expert style roles.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much that every single thing they have to do needs to be in their background, but if you can
Mm-hmm.
see how they think, you can start to estimate how might they handle it in the future, how might they interact with people when they're working out the way
Yeah.
forward.
I remember once I was working with a company and they were hiring for a manager's role. And a person that was in a HR department, and the person literally had to spend the whole day talking to all the team leads and managers and really grasping, not identifying. I mean, you cannot do the whole job in one day, but just
Yeah.
like measuring the temperature, and then at the end of the day presenting their findings and like what would be the focus if they would be joining that role. And it doesn't have to be 100% accurate
Mm-hmm.
because of course the person cannot understand the whole situation of the company's
Yeah.
state, but yeah, it just helps, to see how the person is asking, what is the communication between with various of stakeholders, because this is super important too, right? So yeah, basically I always suggest to um, create like a few pillars where you see the person should perform, and then to test those, right? Because sometimes like experience can be a different in different companies, right? And just the title, it doesn't represent everything as much.
No, it doesn't. And with certain industries, even for entry level roles or early individual contributor roles, the the amount of thinking and
Hmm.
processing that the role requires is actually quite high.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of industries now where the roles that were merely following steps or merely doing as you were told, they don't actually exist
Yeah.
quite like that anymore.
And
So
new
almost,
you are coming to the market, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
almost every role requires some level of structured thinking or some
Hmm.
level of listening,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
responding back, giving feedback. And so creating a scenario where you can watch some of that happen
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
tells you a lot in
Totally
terms of
agree.
what you want out of the candidates, but also as the candidate, it gives you a chance
Hmm.
to showcase what you can do.
Yeah, and for the candidate themselves, right?
Yeah,
They can see whether they will feel
yeah,
really in their shoes talking to
yeah,
these people, right? Every day. So it's a nice
yeah.
test for both of the parties. Great, Daryn. Thank you so much for your time and participating today.
It's been great to speak with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe on the media of your choice. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And if you need help with your recruitment, please visit jobrely.com.